Right now, there's a good chance you're watching this on a Samsung screen. Maybe your phone is Samsung, your TV, your microwave. The chip inside your laptop, probably Samsung too. Samsung is everywhere, but here's what almost nobody knows. This company, this trillion-dollar, world-dominating tech empire, started by selling noodles, dried fish, grocery staples, out of a tiny shop in a city most Americans have never heard of. And the man behind it all, he wasn't a Silicon Valley genius. He wasn't a Stanford dropout with a MacBook and a dream. He was the son of a Korean landowner who failed twice before he even got started. So how does a noodle shop become the most important company in the history of an entire nation? That story is far darker, far more ruthless, and far more fascinating than anything Samsung's marketing team will ever tell you. Here's something that should stop you cold. Samsung's revenue in a single recent year has been larger than the GDP of entire countries. The company accounts for roughly 20% of South Korea's total exports. Think about that, one company, 1/5 of a nation's economic output. For context, no American company, not Apple, not Amazon, not ExxonMobil, has ever come close to that kind of stranglehold on the US economy. Samsung isn't just a company. It's a country inside a country. And it was built by one man through war, political corruption, personal betrayal, and an almost insane willingness to bet everything, repeatedly, on industries he knew nothing about. His name was Lee Byung-chul. By the time he died in 1987, he had transformed a poverty-scarred Korea into an industrial titan. He had personally mentored the leaders who would take Samsung into the digital age. And he had laid the exact blueprint that allows Samsung today to go head-to-head with Apple, TSMC, and the entire might of Silicon Valley. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Samsung is the way it is, why it's aggressive, why it's everywhere, and why the Apple versus Samsung rivalry is really just the latest chapter in a century-long war for survival. Let's go back to the beginning. It's 1910. Japan has just formally annexed Korea. The entire peninsula is now a colony. Korean culture, language, even names, systematically suppressed. The economy is stripped for Japanese benefit. Into this world, on February 12, 1910, Lee Byung-chul is born in Yuryong, a small rural county in the south of Korea. His family is relatively well-off, large landowners, so Lee gets something rare for the time, an education. He studies in Japan at Waseda University in Tokyo, but he doesn't graduate, he comes home. His father gives him 300 siok of rice, a substantial inheritance for the era, and Lee tries his first business. A rice mill, it fails. He tries a transportation company. It fails too, to swings, to misses. Most people stop there. Lee Byung-chul was not most people. In 1938, at 28 years old, with whatever capital he had left, he opens a small trading company in the city of Daegu, Korea. He calls it Samsung Sanghoe. In Korean, Samsung means 3 stars. 3, in Korean culture, represents something powerful and eternal. Stars represent being big, numerous, and everlasting. Big dreams for a company that, on its first day, employed exactly 40 people and sold dried fish, locally grown groceries, and noodles. But Lee had already learned something from his 2 failures. He wasn't interested in making a good product. He was interested in understanding trade, movement, supply chains. The flow of goods, because whoever controls the flow, controls everything. For the first few years, Samsung Sanghoe actually works. Lee builds up a small noodle factory. He exports goods to China, Beijing, and Manchuria. Business is modest but growing. And then history intervenes in the most brutal way possible. World War II escalates across the Pacific. Japan tightens its colonial grip on Korea. Resources are rationed. Trade collapses. Lee's export routes to China are cut off. By the mid-1940s, Samsung Sanghoe is essentially frozen. And then on August 15, 1945, Japan surrenders, Korea is liberated. You'd think that's a happy ending, it isn't. The Korean peninsula is immediately divided. Soviet forces in the north, American forces in the south. To competing ideologies drawing a line across a nation, Lee pivots fast. He moves Samsung's headquarters to Seoul and restarts, this time with brewing and sugar trading. For a few years, it works beautifully. Lee is growing again. Then June 25, 1950, the Korean War begins. North Korean forces pour across the 38th parallel. Seoul falls within days. Lee has to physically flee the capital with almost nothing. Samsung's assets, factories, inventory, infrastructure are either destroyed or seized. He had built something real, and the war burned it to the ground. Most men in that situation grieve, take stock, accept a smaller life. Lee Byung-chul looked at the smoldering ruins of post-war Korea and saw something else entirely. He saw opportunity. The Korean War ends in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty, technically, but a ceasefire. And South Korea is, by any measure, devastated. Infrastructure destroyed, millions dead, the economy in ruins. The South Korean government under President Syngman Rhee is desperate. They need to rebuild fast, and Lee Byung-chul steps directly into that vacuum. He builds a sugar refinery, Chaebol, which becomes one of Korea's first modern manufacturing operations. Sugar is precious in post-war Korea. He controls supply to an entire country. Then he does it again with textiles, Chaebol, which becomes Korea's largest woolen mill. This is the pattern Lee has cracked open. Don't just trade goods, manufacture them. Control the entire chain, raw material in, finished product out, distribution locked down. But here's the part that gets uncomfortable. Lee didn't build this alone. He built it with the Korean government. In post-war Korea, USA dollars were flowing into the country. The government controlled access to those dollars, to import licenses, to raw materials. And Lee, through relationships, negotiations, and deals that critics would later call outright corruption, positioned Samsung to receive preferential access. This was Korea's Chaebol system being born in real time. A Chaebol is a massive family-controlled industrial conglomerate with deep ties to government. Think of it as capitalism with Korean characteristics, private ownership, but state-directed growth. And Samsung was the original model. Lee understood something most Western entrepreneurs miss. In a developing nation, the government isn't the enemy of business. It's the engine. Whoever partners with the government wins. By the early 1960s, Samsung is no longer a trading company. It's becoming an empire. In 1961, military coup. Park Chung-hee seizes power in South Korea, bad news for democracy. But for industrialists like Lee, the new regime had a plan. Park Chung-hee believed South Korea could only survive by industrializing, fast and aggressively. He chose a small group of chaebols to be national champions, feeding them capital, contracts, and protection. Samsung was at the top of that list, but then Lee makes his first genuinely audacious leap. In 1969, he announces Samsung is entering electronics. Everyone thinks he's lost his mind. Samsung was a food and textile company. Korea had no electronics industry to speak of. Japan dominated the space. America dominated the space. What could a Korean conglomerate possibly add? Lee's answer: manufacturing efficiency and sheer scale. He creates Samsung Electronics and almost immediately begins producing black and white televisions, washing machines, refrigerators, cheap, functional consumer goods aimed at a rising Korean middle class. The products aren't innovative, they're not premium, but they are everywhere, aggressively priced. Widely distributed. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook Samsung uses against Apple today, just 50 years earlier. Then Lee does something that changes Korean history. In 1974, Samsung acquires a 50% stake in Korea Semiconductor. Semiconductors is the literal brain of every electronic device. This wasn't a business decision, it was a declaration of war on the future. Lee apparently told his executives, "Semiconductors are the rice of industry. Whoever controls them controls everything." At the time, Samsung had almost zero expertise in chip making. They had to bring in foreign engineers. They had to send Korean engineers abroad to learn. They essentially rebuilt an entire technology from scratch, and it cost a fortune. By the early 1980s, Samsung is pumping billions into semiconductor R&D at a moment when the entire Korean economy is under strain. Competitors think Lee is gambling the company. He isn't gambling. He's engineering the future. In 1983, Lee makes his famous declaration, internally nicknamed the Tokyo Declaration, that Samsung will design and manufacture its own DRAM memory chips. Within 2 years, Samsung is producing 6 DRAM chips. It is now a serious player in global semiconductors. The Noodle shop has become a chip foundry. Here's what makes Samsung fundamentally different from any company you've studied. Most companies are horizontal. They make one thing and sell it. Samsung is vertical. It makes almost everything it sells and everything its competitors sell too. Think about it, Samsung makes the chips inside iPhones. It makes the screens, the memory, the camera sensors. Apple is Samsung's biggest competitor and one of its biggest customers. That's not an accident. That's a business model engineered over decades to make Samsung indispensable. By the time Lee Byung-chul dies in 1987, Samsung Group is already generating revenues equivalent to roughly 4% of South Korea's entire GDP. The conglomerate spans consumer electronics, semiconductors, heavy industries, shipbuilding, construction, insurance, retail, and media. Not a company, a civilization. Under his son and successor, Lee Kun-hee, Samsung Electronics revenues would grow to exceed $200 billion annually. The semiconductor division alone, the one Lee Byung-chul started with near-zero expertise, would become the #1 memory chip maker in the world, a title it has held for decades. Samsung today has a market cap that has surpassed $300 billion. All of it traces back to a 40-person trading shop selling dried fish in 1938. Let's be clear about something. This is not a clean story. Lee Byung-chul was brilliant. He was also deeply intertwined with some of the most corrupt political regimes in South Korean history. In 1966, Samsung was caught smuggling, specifically illegally importing saccharin disguised inside industrial machinery parts, a scandal that rocked the country. Lee had to publicly hand over a major Samsung subsidiary to the government as penalty. He was humiliated, but he survived. In 1979, as political instability gripped Korea following President Park Chung-hee's assassination, Lee faced new scrutiny. His relationships with multiple authoritarian governments raised serious ethical questions about whether Samsung's rise was built on merit or on crony capitalism. The honest answer is both. Samsung's efficiency and execution are real. The ambition is real. But in a different political environment, without government-directed capital, without preferential treatment, without the Chaebol system, Samsung might never have escaped being a mid-sized Korean trading company. Critics of the Chaebol system argue it created a two-tiered economy in Korea, massive conglomerates at the top, small businesses perpetually crushed beneath them. And that criticism never fully went away. Lee Byung-chul's son, Lee Kun-hee, would later be convicted of bribery. His grandson, Lee Jae-young, the current de facto head of Samsung, was convicted of bribery related to a massive Korean political scandal in 2017 involving President Park Geun-hye. The pattern of power, political entanglement, and legal controversy runs through Samsung's DNA. It didn't start with Lee Byung-chul, but it started because of him. As you watch Samsung's story unfold, a few words echo through it. Lee Byung-chul reportedly told his managers, "I have never been able to live in peace. Even when I sleep, I am thinking about business. That obsession, relentless, consuming, bordering on mania, is the one trait every person who knew him mentions," a South Korean economist once wrote. Samsung didn't grow inside Korea's economy. Samsung built Korea's economy and moved in, and perhaps the most chilling line, attributed to Lee himself as he entered the semiconductor business against all advice: "We will either make history or become history." He made history. Let's come back to where we started. In 1938, Daegu, Korea, a 28-year-old man who'd already failed twice opens a trading company with 40 employees. They sell noodles, dried fish, groceries. He calls it Samsung. 3 stars, eternal, vast, powerful. It seemed like wishful thinking. 49 years later, when Lee Byung-chul dies on November 19, 1987, Samsung is a conglomerate with operations spanning a dozen industries, employing hundreds of thousands, and generating revenues that stagger economists. And today, your phone screen, your television, the chip in your car, the server that stores your photos in the cloud. Probably Samsung, one man, one trading company. One relentless, ruthless refusal to stay small. The noodle shop did conquer the world, and the stars, 3 of them, are still burning. Here's a question worth sitting with. If Samsung could go from dried fish to microchips in 1 generation, what does that say about the industries we think are permanent today? Streaming, social media, AI, electric vehicles? Who's the Lee Byung-chul of the next revolution, and do they already have a noodle shop? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit different, like and subscribe. We go deep on the business empires and founder stories that actually shaped the modern world. See you at next one.